Hey there everybody, today I'm looking at Vita3K, the world's first and only PlayStation Vita emulator. Today I'm going to go over how to install and set up Vita3K, including how to install firmware and your own games, and I'm also going to go over some of the features of the emulator, and of course test out a few games to see how they run on my PC. So without further ado, let's set up Vita3K. Okay, so it's pretty easy to find Vita3K's website, and on here we have a whole bunch of information. By clicking on Quick Start, it'll show you some of the stuff you need for Vita3K, such as Microsoft, redistributables, the minimum specs, and of course also links to the PlayStation firmware packages that you need in order to help Vita3K run. Then we have the actual download link for whatever operating system you're using. Installing Vita3K is super easy. You just unzip the file and put it wherever you want. I, of course, also made a shortcut of the exe, that's what I usually do. That's pretty much all you gotta do to install Vita3K, but we are not quite done yet. The only other thing we really need to do is install some firmware. So you open up Vita3K, it'll ask you to create a user profile, which can be done pretty quickly, and then in the top left corner, you hit install firmware and point Vita3K to the location of your firmware packages. It only takes a minute or so, and then we're all done with that. I've always thought it's kind of satisfying watching the console go by and checking everything and installing it. I don't know, it's kind of, it's oddly satisfying to me. Anyway, next it's on to the games. Now, installing games is pretty easy. Ripping them from your Vita is also fairly easy, but there are different processes depending on what software you use. So the whole guide on how to rip your games is on the Vita3K website, and like I said, it's different depending on what kind of software you got on your Vita. Installing games can be done easily from either a zip file or a VPK file. All you gotta do is tell Vita3K where the game is and you're good to go. That's pretty much it. But do be aware that they don't support rips from vitamins, I guess. So don't try to install a game from there because it's not gonna work. Of course, as always, I can't condone piracy. You should always install your own games from your own Vita. With that out of the way, let's get into the emulator's features. Vita3K is well sorted out, and even though it's still in its early stages, I think it's pretty decent. The UI is fairly slick, in my opinion, though not the most polished. When you open up the emulator after you sign in, you're presented with a list of games and apps, pretty much like any other emulator. For options, you have a debug tab, which lets you see a bunch of debug data that I'm not going to pretend like I'm smart enough to understand. Of course, then you have config options. There's not a lot of appealing options here, and as far as I can tell, there's none to adjust graphics or anything like that. Though there are some interesting things here, but I'm honestly not sure how useful they are. Like I said, it's a little bit bare bones, but overall I do like how it looks. It's not bad. One nice feature of the emulator is how, when you play a game, it shows your frame time and FPS at the top of the game window, which is pretty cool. Although there are a few things about the game window that are not so cool. Vita3K seems to always run in windowed mode, and I don't think there's an option to toggle full screen. It's a bit annoying, but not world-ending. Also, I don't think there's any save state or load state feature, though I guess that's not that big of a deal either. But the one thing that is a bit annoying is that there doesn't seem to be any way to access the config menu, or any other menu for that matter, while you're in a game. There isn't any intuitive way to stop emulation, you just gotta X out of it. Once again, none of these things are earth-shattering problems, it's more just like quality of life things. It's just kind of annoying that you can't adjust anything or play around with settings while you're actually in a game. It doesn't let you do that. With that being said, let's get into the actual games. Like most emulators, their website has a game compatibility list, and we can see that there really aren't a lot of games that run very well. A few dozen at the most. And few of these are really AAA games. But that's okay, because there were still some fun games to test out. I tried out 4 different games on Vita3K, and my results were somewhat surprising. I was actually fairly impressed by how well some of these games ran. Valhalla didn't run at the best frame rate, but was pretty much playable and mostly free from glitches. Persona 4 Golden, which is a game that I think a lot of people are going to ask about with this emulator, It ran at about 14 FPS average for me and had some weird audio bugs. So I wouldn't really call it playable, but I mean, technically I think you probably could play through it. But honestly, the performance is not that bad considering Persona 4 Golden is a more complex game than some of the others here. Once again, I really wouldn't choose to play it like this, but it's not too shabby, really. Black Ops Declassified, on the other hand, I was not able to get past the menus, even though it was listed as playable minus, meaning that it's playable, but you can't actually play all the way through it. But that's okay, it's a AAA game, I guess you kind of expect it to not perform as well. Finally, I played a game called Whispering Willow that ran very, very well on my system. The game had a few stutters and frame drops, but otherwise it ran at pretty much a solid 30 FPS all the way through. I was really impressed. My only real problem was that the audio didn't seem to work, but beyond that it ran pretty well. Once again, I know I've said this before, but I'll say it again, my PC specs are a laptop with a Core i7-10875H and an RTX 2070 Super Max-Q. So decent specs, although I feel like with this emulator the specs are probably not what's important. I think it mainly is an optimization problem. I don't think better specs is probably going to get you that much better performance, maybe a little bit. But I think that's probably not what this is about. Overall, given the current state of Vita3K, I would still classify it as an experimental emulator. Not really an emulator I'd sit down and play for recreational purposes, but it is interesting to see how things are progressing. In some ways, given the advanced age of the Vita, I'm a bit surprised that only 28 or so games are considered fully playable, while many games still don't even boot or get past the menus. But I think that the reason why Vita3K is the only Vita emulator out there, and why it's maybe a bit underdeveloped still, is probably kind of the same reason why Xbox emulation never really took off. It's because there's not that much of a point to Vita emulation. So not many people are that interested in developing it. And I'm not saying that Vita3K is bad. In fact, I think all things considered, Vita3K is pretty awesome. It's very well put together, and some games run exceptionally well. The problem is that I don't think there's a huge market for Vita emulation, mainly because of the fact that most of the games on Vita have superior versions available on PC or on another platform like PS3 or PS4. So there's not really a lot of games exclusive to the Vita that would make emulating the system very enticing for the average user. You know, I mean, the reason why I emulate PS2 is because there's some games where the best version of it is on PS2. You know, like the PC ports of the Silent Hill games, to be honest, are I mean, they're not absolutely terrible, but they're pretty bad. And a lot of PC ports in the early 2000s were like that. So that's why I use, you know, PS2 for a lot of these games, because it's just a far better version. Whereas with the Vita, how many games have the best version of it on Vita? Probably zero, if I'm being honest. And that's not picking on the Vita. I had one as a teenager and I liked it a lot. It's just, you know, it's a mobile system, so it's not going to have the most robust games ever. But with that being said, it is very interesting to see how well Vita3K is doing, and I am excited to see how Vita3K does in the future. I think it's really cool that, you know, we finally do have a working PS Vita emulator. I mean, okay, I say finally, Vita3K's been around for a while, but still, it's made some decent progress, you know? I'm just excited to see where it goes. Like I said, I really liked the PS Vita as a console when I was a teenager. I want to see how much progress this emulator can make in the next year or so. That's going to be it for today, everybody. If you enjoyed my video, make sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more emulation and video game content coming at you real soon. Have a good one.